The beginning of the 70s were everything but a fun time for Paul McCartney. The Beatles were going through one of the ugliest breakups in the history of music, and John Lennon was constantly attacking him not only in interviews but also songs. But most importantly, fans and critics were absolutely demolishing every single album he released. It got to the point where people didn't even know if McCartney was capable of making a comeback. But all the doubts were cleared in November of 1973 with the release of what probably is his best album, the wonderful masterpiece Ben on the Run. For the last couple of weeks, I've been doing some research on Paul McCartney's discography because I'm trying to make a video ranking every single album from worst to best, and honestly, going back to his albums and listening to his discography all over again made me realize how important Ben on the Run was for McCartney. Not only because it's one of his best albums with one of the most solid track lists, if not the most solid one, but also because of all the complications that surrounded the album that I think played a really important part in the process of regaining his confidence. You see, after the Beatles broke up, McCartney didn't even know if he wanted to continue doing music. It was actually thanks to Linda that he was convinced to make the McCartney album, and he was quite satisfied with it, but the critics completely demolished the album. Not only that, but thanks to that incredibly controversial interview he released along with the album, everyone believed that Paul was the one who broke up the Beatles, and the critics were constantly villainizing him, making it seem like he was the one who broke up the band. Still, the McCartney album wasn't seen as a complete failure because it sold pretty well and it performed decently on the charts, but considering the fact that John Lennon released the Plastic Ono Band and George Harrison released All Things Must Pass, two of the most acclaimed albums in the history of music, it's clear that McCartney wasn't really doing that well. The fact that Ram, in his first album with his band Wings, while live released in 1971, was also very poorly received by the critics, made McCartney feel even worse. McCartney at this point was questioning if he was able to make a good album without the Beatles. So after another unsuccessful release by the band, Red Rose Speedway, released in 1973, McCartney was decided to make an incredible album. An album that was going to be so good that fans and critics would have no choice but to love it. And that is exactly what Ben on the Run was, an album that proved to everyone that McCartney was still able to make incredible music and to create an incredible album without the help of John Lennon and without the help of the Beatles. There were more than a few complications with the recording sessions of this album right from the get-go. I mean, first of all, Paul McCartney had the incredible idea of going to Lagos and record the album there because EMI Studios had a studio over there as well. But the day before they were supposed to leave for Lagos, one of the band's guitarists and the band's drummer decided to leave the band, infuriating McCartney.
I wasn't cool about it. I'm just acting cool now. It's a long time after. I was definitely not cool about it. You kidding? I was livid. It was like trash.
That was obviously a really big problem for McCartney, but it wasn't really as big as realizing as soon as he got to Lagos that the studio they were supposed to work in was barely even ready. Actually, during the first few days, they barely even recorded anything because they were getting the studio ready. But even that was the least of their problems because on a night when Paul and Linda were walking down the street, they got mugged.
All the doors open and 5 young chaps get out.
And then you realise.
And there's a little squat one who's got a knife. And Linda was great. She's screaming at him. She said, "Leave him alone! Leave him alone! He's a musician!" Like, that's gonna help.
After hearing all these crazy stories of how problematic the recording sessions for this album were, it's almost impossible to believe that they resulted in one of the best albums by Paul McCartney, and honestly one of the best albums of the 70s, because I gotta tell you, the level of quality that this album enjoys is something you won't see again in Paul McCartney's discography after 1973. Because there's the obvious fact that a lot of people, especially nowadays, including myself, see Ram as Paul McCartney's best album, but I still believe that track by track Ben on the Run is the most solid album that Paul McCartney ever released. I mean, right at the beginning of this album, you have one of the best songs Paul McCartney ever wrote, the multi-faced epic about a band that's escaping prison, the wonderful title track Ben on the Run. The incredible guitar playing, the harmonies and the horns that introduce the most epic part of the song, and then Paul McCartney's incredible performance that feels energetic, fun, playful. You know, it seems like he's really committed to the story he's telling in this song. Then after that, you have one of the most energetic and intense songs that Paul McCartney ever wrote, Jet, an incredible track that's one of my favorite moments in this album. But the biggest moment of realization in this album, in my opinion, comes in the form of the song Bluebird, because you go from all the intensity and epic nature of the 2 previous songs to this relaxing and peaceful tune that basically tells you, buckle up because you don't know what's coming next. Welcome to the world of creativity of Paul McCartney. And the fact that the next song on this album, Mr. Van der Vid, has a saxophone solo in it, kind of confirms his theory you already had that the album's going to be incredibly diverse. That's before you jump jump into what probably is my favorite song on the album, Let Me Roll It. There's a lot of theories about this song that basically say that the echoed vocals and the sharp and precise guitar playing are supposed to mimic the work of John Lennon in albums like Imagine and Plastic Ono Band. I personally disagree. I think that this is way more melodic and power chord style, you know, the type that you'd find in the 80s, for example, rather than anything that John Lennon had ever done. There's also a lot of people who believe that the lyrics in this song are supposed to be some sort of response to John Lennon's How Do You Sleep, but I personally think this is not true. And actually, I believe there's a biographer, you know, someone that basically studied Paul McCartney's life that said this is not true, so yeah. Then after that, you have the Afro Soul inspired Mamunia, one of my favorite moments in the album. I love the bright guitar playing, I love the harmonies, I love the melody, the rhythm. It's a really beautiful song. No Words is probably the weakest point in the album for me. I like the tune, I think it has a really nice melody, and I like the guitar playing, I like the harmonies, but overall I think it's not as interesting as the rest of the compositions in this album. Part of the whole appeal of Band on the Run is seeing McCartney play around with a lot of different styles, and you know, I don't really see him going out of his comfort zone with this one. A song that I don't think is a skip, I don't think you should avoid the song, but it's definitely not the most engaging moment in the album, especially because right after this one you have Picasso's Last Words, probably the most emotional moment in the whole album, so yeah. Needless to say, 1985 is an incredible way to close the album. I love how they added the mellotron, you know, it adds a layer of psychedelia to the song that I think it works really well, and of course you have what probably is the best vocal performance by Paul McCartney in this entire album.
Well, I just can't get enough of that sweet stuff my little lady gets behind.
Now correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that in the US version you also have the song Helen Wheels packed in the track list in between No Words and Picasso's Last Words. If that's the case, once again correct me if I'm wrong, I think the song is amazing and it's a really good addition to the track. It should have been in the UK version too, but you know, what do you do? I know that a lot of you, especially if you're Beatles fans that don't really know the solo careers of the members, don't know a lot of the songs that I mentioned on this video, but believe me when I tell you that these are among the greatest songs that Paul McCartney ever wrote. But it's not only that the songs are amazing, because there's also the fact that every single song on this album is unique and different from each other. From the vocals, to the production, to the percussion, to the instrumentation, every single sound palette in every single one of these songs is different from the other, and somehow the album stays consistent. You know, the album is cohesive. It doesn't feel disconnected. It doesn't feel like a compilation of tracks. It actually feels like every song belongs to this album. And that's saying a lot, you know, especially when it comes to Paul McCartney, because when you dive deep into his solo discography, you'll notice that one of the biggest issues with a lot of his worst albums is that he wasn't able to maintain focus, because he tried to adopt a lot of different genres, like we see in McCartney 2, like we see in albums like Pipes of Peace, or maybe Press to Play. I don't know what clicked on McCartney's brain in 1973 that led him to make one of the greatest albums of all time, but believe me when I tell you that when people say this is McCartney's biggest victory over the music industry, over the rest of the Beatles, over John Lennon, and even over himself, they're not exaggerating, because this was the point where McCartney made an album that was so good and so perfect that people had no choice but to stand in line and wait to give him his praises. Of course, there's a bunch of other Paul McCartney albums that deserve a lot of praise, like Ram, like McCartney 1, like Flaming Pie, but there's no other album in his discography that reached the same level of success that Band on the Run did, and it was thanks to this success that Paul McCartney was able to continue as a musician and make albums like Venus and Mars, like Wings at the Speed of Sound, London Town, and so on and so forth. So even if you're a guy that likes some of his other releases a little bit more, like myself, that should never get in the way of the truth. And the undeniable truth is that Band on the Run is by far the most important album of Paul McCartney's life.
The cute, because he...
The cute Beatle?
Yes, that's what they called you.
It's just some foliage we've got around. The lady thought it'd be fun.
You look like you're
How's
having...
that?
Oh, I thought that was well done. Well,
Cute?
And that is going to be it for today's video. I'm really excited to see what you guys will have to say about this one. Do you agree with me? Do you think that Band on the Run is the most important Paul McCartney album? Or do you think that an album like Ram or McCartney 1 are more important than this one? Let me know in the comments. I do hope you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, an album, or an artist, leave it down below as well. And I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your requests as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.